다음은 토론에 참여하는 TCK 인베스트먼트 마크테토 공동대표님과 이승윤 스토리 공동대표님을 함께 무대 위로 모시도록 하겠습니다. Next, please welcome Mr. Mark Teto, co-CEO of TCK Investment, and Mr. Seung-Yoon Lee, CEO and co-founder of Storyprotocol, will be joining us as panelists today. I think we're ready to proceed with our next session. 자, 그럼 이어서 진행을 맡아주실 마크 테토 대표님께 마이크를 넘기도록 하겠습니다. We'll proceed with the panel discussion, and I'd like to give the microphone to Mark Teto. Please be started.
Great to be with you all today, and thanks to Jason for a great presentation. It's probably the second time I've seen it, but I learn a ton of new things every time I see your presentation. And so the themes that you started to sketch out for us in that presentation, we want to dive in a little bit more deeply in this interactive discussion. Again, with myself moderating, I'm Mark Teto. I've been an investor in Korea for 14 years. In Korean startups through VC and also as an angel. And with our two co-founders of Story, Jason, who you just heard from, and SY. And so the framing of this discussion, again, just to kind of put us in the context of this conference, is advances in AI technologies, innovations in business models. And so those themes are ones that Jason started to sketch out in the presentation, but before we dig into them further, Jason, you kind of mentioned your background during your presentation, but also want to give a chance to SY to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, this is SY. I'm one of the co-founders of Story, and I've been working at the intersection of technology and content for more than a decade, kind of trying to figure out a sustainable business model for content creators and IP owners.
And Jason, again, you mentioned in the presentation, but quick background on yourself as well.
Yeah, so SY's co-founder, building Story, and my background, I studied philosophy and computer science with a focus on AI research at Stanford, and then after Stanford, I was at DeepMind for a couple of years, where I shared some of those experiences with you, and then was very fortunate to get very excited about the blockchain space for the reasons I already mentioned, and then met SY, and together we've been building Story for the past 2.5 years.
Great. And maybe a lot of you coming into the discussion today, to this conference today, it's an AI conference, and maybe you were thinking more along the lines that you might hear more about LLMs and AI, and you have. And then you heard about blockchain, and you might be thinking, where does this fit in? And so to frame that, I think what you start to hear in the presentation now is that we kind of were moving from a world of closed ecosystems and closed AI, and maybe later on to open ecosystems of AI. But then maybe there's a need to move even beyond those current open ecosystems, which might fail at value capture, and apply new technologies to achieve that, and blockchain being one of them. So kind of that's the flow I want to kind of talk us through today with our two panelists, kind of going from closed to open, and then how from open to beyond do we achieve more with through blockchain and through Story. So with that intro, starting kind of with the problems of the original ecosystem, the problems of the closed ecosystem. SY, I've also heard you speak on this, and even going back to your prior startups and Radish, I think you've thought for a long time, more than anyone else I know, about how to fix the problems of content and IP, value capture, and how to move from a closed to an open ecosystem. But why don't we start there with the problems of the closed ecosystem? You sometimes refer to it as the tragedy of the commons, kind of an overgrazing of the internets. There was the picture in the presentation of the cows kind of gobbling up the barren field. So can you start by laying out what the problems of the original system have been?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a massive bottleneck in terms of AI development itself if there's no way for IP holders and content creators to get compensated and have the right provenance and attribution in the right way. So I think there are two problems at the moment. I mean, twofold problem. First is the fact that all these AI systems are training on all these IPs, and your precious creative outputs, your data, without your consent, basically, right? So that the reason why we see something like the dog video that we saw from Sora, all these things is it actually trained on a massive amount of creative outputs that other folks made. And actually, if you ask someone like OpenAI CTO Mira Murati, oh, have you actually trained on YouTube videos? She just doesn't deny or confirm. She just says, we just trained on public available data, right? And not just that, they kind of actually also hijack your future revenue and future traffic, because as Jason said, what happens is you don't need to go to, there was this implicit economic covenant between in the internet where you get the content, but you actually bring the traffic back, and you actually get ad revenue, subscription revenue from that traffic. But you no longer have to go to these websites. You actually can get all the answers you want from the ChatGPT interface or whatever kind of LLM interface that you're consuming. So what happens is you get your past works are getting exploited, but on top of that, you're basically internally shackled with all the future revenue and traffic going to this big AI. So what happens in that instance is, this tragedy commons, the kind of the overgrazing of the comments that you've seen from Jason's presentation, where all these cows of LLMs are eating and devouring and gobbling up all these greens of data, but no one's watering the green. So if that happens, actually, it's actually suicidal in AI for the long term as well. And if you, there was a recent research that has come out from Nature magazine where actually, if you try to bring synthetic data to these AI systems, they also doesn't really work, and it's kind of an inbreeding problem almost. Yeah.
Right, and if some of those are the kind of problems with how the system has been, moving a little bit into the sort of open AI approach, how do you envision solving those problems, and how does Story begin to approach those problems? Maybe Esme first.
Yeah, I'll comment on the first, but I think on a very first simple level is that we embed the terms around the usage of their data and IP, of our IP, into the IP and data itself. So it's almost, all the metadata around licensing, royalty sharing, all the copyright information gets embedded into each IP, right? So NFT has given ownership layer for IPs, but what we're doing is actually a bit further than that, and turning IPs into IP Legos, where all these, AI systems to any usage of the IPs without intermediaries can start using these data, and where in a way that IP owners keep the right provenance attribution compensate they've set themselves, right? The reason why this is powerful in a simple primitive is because for AI systems, they cannot actually try to do a billion paralegal negotiations to actually license this data, right? They cannot talk to a billion people, billions of data holders to actually license each piece of IP. So what you need is now a programmable IP system where each IP has embedded almost like a QR code of copyright and royalty sharing licensing data. Yeah.
Great, and to also plunge into Jason's take on some of this as well. So there are some open source skeptics in the ecosystem as well, and the open source skeptics kind of point to potential downsides of making AI development open source, and there could be geopolitical and security concerns of open source AI, and various concerns about, again, value capture for the original creators. So can you address kind of how these OpenAI skeptics have interacted with the field, and how you think of their take?
Yeah, well, the theme of this conference is unlimited scalability, and unlimited scalability is impossible without open source. If you think about OpenAI, I'll use that as an example. Unfortunately, OpenAI is not open source, ironically. But if you think about OpenAI, if you're an individual creator and you want to fine-tune that model, if you want to improve it with your own data, you can't, because you have no idea how this model works. And so you have very limited scalability. You can only use what OpenAI has allowed you to use, and that's going to slow progress. And so if you want to build a model around your own voice and use AI to empower your creativity, You can't do that unless you have an open source model that you can build on top of. So the only way to reach unlimited scalability is through open source. Closed source, it's bottlenecked by the decisions of 3 or 4 people around the world. I don't think any of us want to live in that world. And this isn't about blockchain. This is just about open source in general. And so I think it's very important to have open source. It allows us to make progress more quickly. And then some say, well, look, open source is unsafe. You know, it's unsafe or it's bad for national security. Those are the 2 things that people will say. So I disagree with the unsafe. I think that open source AI is much safer because I think we all know that you can't really hide anything in today's digital world. So you can try to build a closed source model. You can try to keep it away from foreign actors that you're worried about, but eventually they'll get their hands on it. And when they do, you won't be prepared for how to deal with it, right? So I think closed source is just unprepared open source. Closed source is just we're not prepared for when someone takes this and finds a way to get it, right? So open source is good because everyone around the world can have the ability to investigate, interrogate, and secure open source models together, right? Whereas closed source, you might only have one team at one company that knows anything about this model. And the moment someone, foreign actor finds a way to get a hand on this model, then no one else knows how to stop it. And so that's a big risk. And then I think, open source is also just much better for the economics based on some of the things that SY said. So I think that in general, I don't really find many good arguments for closed source. I think both for creators to scale and then also for safety reasons, it's actually much safer to have open source as well. Great.
I think you've answered some of the open source skeptics. But just to kind of walk us through this path towards your vision, if you remember, there was the slide in your presentation. It was sort of the 4 quadrants, and open source at the top and closed at the bottom. And so we're sort of walking from the bottom to the top towards the open source. And there on the open source side, you also had Meta and Llama as an example of an open source solution. But it seems that even if we get to the open source piece, that there's some things that are lacking and that still need to be resolved. And it sounds like you want to move not just up on that metric, but to the right of that slide. So what are these pieces that are missing? Once we kind of can agree that open source is a good thing, then what are the pieces that needs to still be addressed, and why are additional technologies, blockchain, or what you're working on, Story, necessary?
Yeah, well, when it comes to open source, I think it provides the foundation, and that's why we call them foundation models, because open source large language models, open source image models, they all provide the foundation, and there's 2 reasons why open source alone isn't enough. One is it's very hard for the company that's building these models to sustain itself. Like I said in the presentation, Mark Zuckerberg, he makes billions of dollars in revenue every year, so he can sponsor the development of open source models. But not many companies make billions of dollars a year. So again, if Mark Zuckerberg decides that it's better for Meta's business model to stop open sourcing, then we don't have open source, and that's a big problem. So I think that number 1, we need to find a way to help model creators monetize, and I think a good way to do that is to allow them to have access to unique data sets. At the end of the day, the entire common internet has been scraped. That is already done. You can't take that back. So where is the value coming in now for model creators? It's coming in on the edges. It's Beyonce's voice. It's Blackpink Jennie's voice. Like OpenAI, Meta, these model companies, they don't have access to that IP. So that fine-tuning data, that sort of outer edge, is where all the value is going to be captured now that the common internet's been scraped. So we need a technology that allows those model companies to access that data, monetize it, but also compensate the creators whose data they're using, right? So I think that's kind of why I think open source alone isn't sustainable, because you're relying on these large institutions, and unless they have an existing separate business model, they can't sustain that development. And so blockchains provide a way to create a marketplace that these large model providers can participate in, as well as individual creators whose data is now, becoming the new oil, right? Whose IP is now the new electricity. And so I think you need to create an open market in order to foster continuous sustainable innovation, rather than relying on the goodwill of Mark Zuckerberg or a few other actors in the space that are building open source.
Great. And back to SY. In some of your earlier conversations, I've heard you talk about defensive and offensive angles to implementing Web3 in an AI context. Can you just frame that for us and how you think about defensive versus offensive?
I think what we've talked a lot about in the last 15 minutes is how to protect and give the right kind of attribution of provenance and compensation to IP. Instead of that, I think, I've often give two visions of what we're doing at Story in terms of empowering IP and creativity in the age of AI. One is that defensive vision, which is, okay, AI is scraping all your data. AI is also just kind of hijacking your future revenue and traffic. We got to have a way to protect that, basically, by enshrining copyright to each piece of data and make it easy for AI systems to license that very easily, and allow IP holders and model creators to make fine-tuned models easily. But on top of that, what we think is going to be very exciting is the fact that once you turn these IP into IP Lego pieces, right? And let's say someone's voice is an IP Lego. Let's say a fashion design is an IP Lego. Let's say character is an IP Lego. A narrative universe is a fashion Lego. So all IP Legos can be anything. And the beauty of when I say these IPs are Lego bricks is that you can use it without all these intermediaries. And now you have this magic wand of generative AI. So we think the best fashion design in the future will be coming from a fan designer, just a normal fashion lover who uses a design that's created by the design house as a Lego piece and with generative AI and make a great remixed, customized version of what they've envisioned. It can be the best spin-off to Harry Potter, the best Blackpink music. All these things could come from individual creator in their bedroom, in their living room now, right? So that's kind of what we think is going to be to kind of the more of the offensive vision of story and how what Web3 brings onto the table for IP in the age of AI, because now IP itself is not just a siloed IP; it's a platform where all these creators with generative AI can actually create incredibly new and interesting remixes. And actually compare that with like 5 or 10 years ago, or even 3 years ago, when you have something like a Harry Potter character, when you have a fashion design, there's not much you can do really, like besides fan art or fan fiction. But now you can make an incredible video, you can make an incredible music, you can make incredible fashion design, and we actually are all about actually empowering and supporting application developers and entrepreneurs who are making it easy for just everyday creator, everyday fan to create incredible new product with this generative AI using Lego's IP Lego bricks that other people have created and contributed to.
Right, and maybe just to rephrase that in some real-world examples that maybe can hit a little bit more viscerally with our audience as well, just to make sure I understand it correctly. So if we think of the defensive model, right, even for me, I still remember my kind of first attempts at using generative AI image models. And around those times that those models came out, a lot of news articles were artists who recognize their work in the output image, right, even to the point where the artist's signature, pieces of it were visible in the output image. And so, rightfully they're thinking, this model has trained on my work and taken my work. How do I defend against that, right? And so this is a real world problem that needs to be solved and is solved through the innovations and technologies that you're working on at Story, right? Also, YouTube creators, MKBHD also published a video recently that Google had been training on his videos as well. So these are creators. Some of them you follow, some of them maybe the people in this audience as well, who are seeing their work kind of getting taken up into AI and thinking, how do I defend my work and how do I hopefully capture some of the value? But I think what you're saying now with the offensive side, right, is you actually grow the pool of IP that's possible, right? Not just how do I defend what's already been put out there, the works that are already mine, but you're growing the possibilities of the IP that people can create. And I think part of it is realizing that we all actually have more IP than we realize, and then remixing and creating a whole new field of IP that hasn't existed before. So I've heard you both refer to that sort of offensive model sort of as the IP renaissance. And so can you just maybe frame that a little bit for us? What does this renaissance look like to you?
Sure. I mean, I think about technology from like a very historical perspective, and so obviously the Renaissance is an actual historical period, right? And you think about the forces that caused the original Renaissance. Obviously, there was a flourishing of arts and culture, but what led to that? And I think there's many reasons. I can't name every single reason, but I can name two. And the first and most important probably is the invention of a new technology. That technology was a printing press. So with the invention of the printing press in around the 1500s, you had the ability to scale knowledge. You had the ability to translate a copy of the Bible and print thousands of copies and share that with the rest of the world, right? And that ability to print Bibles actually led later on to the Protestant Revolution, which was of course a big part of the Renaissance as well. And it also allowed art and cultures to flourish, but not in the way that people typically think about. Because in the first few decades after the printing press was invented, you had this big problem, which is for the first time is very cheap to copy content, because before you had to be literate, many people could not read or write, and then you had to spend many weeks copying a content, right? You had to copy hundreds of pages of text, and so copying wasn't really an issue before the printing press. Now fast forward, the printing press has been invented, you have this big problem where creators, right, they don't have the ability to protect their work anymore, because now people can copy it and sell their work for free. So it was only after the invention of the printing press that the first copyright laws were invented to protect this concept of IP. So they allow creators to still have incentives to continue creating literature and art, even in a world where the printing press existed, where people could scale their content cheaply. And so it was a combination of the printing press and the invention of these first copyright rules. In the decades that followed the invention of those rules, you had Charles Dickens, you had Shakespeare, you had all these amazing literary and cultural achievements. And I think that when we think about this new Renaissance, it's a combination, again, of two things, right? The first is that you have new technologies that create new powers for creators to generate new culture, new art, new science. And that's obviously AI, and that's obviously social media, the ability to share content with everyone around the world and to be able to create content using AI that can then be shared around the world. But you don't have the second piece, right? We haven't invented a good system to actually continue incentivizing creators in a sustainable way. And I think both of those things, both the technology and the IP system, are needed in order to make AI something that can scale and can sustain itself beyond where it is today. So that's kind of what we mean by the Renaissance, is we look at this as a new epoch of creativity that's ushered in by the invention of and the scalability of AI. But then now we need that second component to make it sustainable and to make it a true Renaissance.
Right, and that's why on this common theme of the offensive side, which you've also sometimes expressed as the Renaissance, or also kind of the positive sum angle to what you're doing. Can you expound upon that as well?
Yeah, so I think it's consistent with what Jay-Z has said. Basically, what Jay-Z is pointing to, Jason is pointing to, is that you have the new technology, but you need a new protection and incentivization system, and that was copyright law for the first phase, which is printing technology. Now we have the social media, which made the distribution cost of content to zero. Now the content creation and substantiation cost is rapidly going to zero, very quickly. And when these two forces are combined, you need a new intellectual property system, which is a new incentivized protection system. And we're proposing that you need this programmable IP layer, where each IP has its programmed, encoded licensing royalty sharing terms as a way. But if you've come to our story house in Seongsu, where we're showing a lot of interesting physical activations around what we're building, you can actually see how with an app like Sekai, which is what I call story Lego meets generative AI meets interactive comics creation. So you can actually use characters that other people have created, or locations that other people have created, or universes that other people have created. And you can actually use these IPs with generative AI to create scene by scene a story that you want, and very easily the AI will help you create storylines. AI will help you make dialogues. You could create each scene panel, and you're actually using all these IP Lego pieces to create that interactive comics. And you can make a very captivating story within a few minutes to 10, 20 minutes, and that's a story that otherwise, which would have taken hours or month, to actually create. And also because there's none of these IP Lego primitive, you have to talk to these IP creators for several months or several years in parallel to like 10, 20 different IP creators. So I think seeing that, or another app called Ablo, where now it has everything from Balmain to Smiley to a lot of fashion brands, and you can, as a fan, as a lover of these brands, and you may have very interesting ideas about how fashion design should be executed. So you can bring a Smiley face, or you can bring a Balmain shoes, and with generative AI, you can start actually designing and customizing that from that base Lego base design to create something that really captures your personality or your more creative vision, right? So I think what's exciting is now you're co-creating with world's biggest IP creators, or even like a lot of different types of collaborators around the world. And with generative AI, it really helps you substantiate the vision very, very quickly. So that's kind of what's exciting. And we talked about Renaissance a lot, but one of the key aspect of Renaissance Venice or Renaissance, Italy, was that fact that it was kind of the crossroads of all these cultures, right? It was connecting Asia to Europe. It was connecting Middle East to Europe, because of that. Venice actually were the artists there were able to remix and co-create and recombine a bunch of different types of art from different cultures to create new stuff. And kind of while we're building a story, we're trying to kind of institutionalize that with the rights framework. Yeah.
So it sounds like what you're doing at Story goes a long way to enabling that renaissance to take place and building in the proper infrastructure that's required. But like any new invention and any new ecosystem, probably can't solve everything on your own. Everyone needs partners. Everyone needs additional adjacent technologies. So as you see what you're doing with Story, what other kind of pieces are still left to be unsolved that other companies or other technologies need to come in and fill in the holes to enable this renaissance?
I mean, I'll go first, but I think one of the exciting things about what kind of building its own blockchain or building on this Web3 technology is something that you've seen historically with some of these biggest ecosystems within Web3. So if you look at something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, what it has done is it's essentially a developer ecosystem, right? So what it's not Vitalik alone, or it's not just Ethereum Foundation alone building everything. It's actually someone else has came up with this concept of NFT, right? Someone else has come up with these all these different types of decentralized finance applications on top of Ethereum. In the same way, what we're trying to do with the IP blockchain is basically we have already 100 plus, up to 200 application developers actively building with us to kind of tackle this vision of how to drive and sustain intellectual property in the age of AI. And it's not just kind of this IP provenance, attribution, compensation, or IP creation platform. It also, yesterday we had a forum on IP and finance where intellectual property can now be put on chain. It can be music rights, it can be comics rights, it can be webtoon rights that can be put on chain, and actually could be tokenized, and they can access a global pool of capital or global, and also all these different types of programmable financial primitives on top of blockchain. So, what's exciting is that this is a kind of movement that we built together with 200 plus different teams, hopefully thousands of teams or tens of thousands of teams together to tackle this problem together. And secondly, I think the big we want to our immediate customers may be developers and entrepreneurs and builders, but our kind of eventual people that we really want to satisfy our creators and fans and consumers of IP. And I think the challenge with any network is that you need a critical mass of users, a critical mass of IPs and creators to actually get the IP to have a network effect. So that's the classic chicken and eggs problem. So what we are trying to do with all these developers we're carving out a very good set of niches, a good set of verticals that we want to tackle to get that right initial critical mass of IPs on board. So again, I didn't expect it to be even fashion, right? Fashion is one vertical, voice is one vertical, stories is one vertical, and others characters, images. So yeah, I think sky is the limit. So we're gonna try to do in the next immediate future, near future, next 1 year to identify these few verticals that we're going to double down on. It's kind of what we're focused on.
Great, and with just our last 1 minute here, I like the last question there during the WorldCoin talk, which was just that for the people in the audience here who might want to know where can they sign up for a story or where can they interact with story, can they get involved, kind of that call to action, how can they get involved if they want to invent or partner with story, where can they find you guys and how can they sign up and get involved?
Sure. I mean, as that's why I mentioned, we're actually here for the week. So we have a space in Seongsu, and we can definitely share more about that. But it's called Story House. So if you go to storyhouse.kbw.xyz, then you can find us there. So we've been there the whole week. It's been a great time here in Seoul. And ultimately, I think what's special about Korea, I'm from Silicon Valley. It's like a combination of really dynamic IP creation that's now gone global. It's the K-dramas, it's the K-pop, it's Squid Game, it's Parasites, these international hits that are very, very new that are coming out, but also some of the world's best engineering universities like Seoul National and KAIST, and a lot of really strong young engineers. And so at Story, we're as that's what I mentioned, we're not building everything ourselves. We're building a foundation for other people to use. And so for creators here or for engineers here that want to build new businesses using these technologies, I think we're really excited to talk to you. And so I think if you come visit us in Story House, we'll be there all day for the next few days. Or you can find us online, and we have a program, an incubator that allows creators and engineers alike to apply and work with us directly. So there's many ways for us to work together, and that's kind of why we're here, is to meet all of you. So appreciate the time, and thank you, Mark, for asking great questions.
Great, and thank you both to making yourself so accessible, both this week at the Story House in Seongsu-dong, but also in our panel today. Thanks for making yourself accessible to share your insights and the exciting innovations you're working on at Story. Thank you very much.
네, 여러분 큰 박수 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 마크 테토 대표님, 이승윤 대표님, 제이슨 자오 대표님 좋은 말씀 고맙습니다. Thank you, Mr. Mark Tato, Mr. Seung-Yoon Lee, and Mr. Jason Zhao.